Eventually, Sonic gets lifted off the ground by hooks put through the holes drilled into his spikes connected to cables in the wall. He could have avoided this if he had just jumped at Eggman right away instead of holding himself back. The story gets boring again for a while. He's told this isn't his secret lair and just another one of his workshops. And he's told that just as he came in, he set a timed bomb running that'll blow up the place in 3 minutes while he used a teleporter to get to another zone. Eggman really didn't need to tell him where the antivirus program was. There's some padding after this. He looks at his watch and sings an out-of-tune song into a microphone that's an altered version of a song Sonic heard before. What a waste of my time. Eggman hits a button and is sent to safety. Sonic only has to do a spin to make the cable snap, so why didn't he do that right away? He runs back to the lab door and sees that it's locked, and the output device hums and there's a thud. He sees a woman leave it with white boots, a blue dress, and brown leggings, and a white headdress. So based on Eggman saying Chun Li, this is Chun-Li. Sonic crossed over with Street Fighter here first, so not even that was original in Worlds Unite. The narration says that since Sonic's a gentleman, he's not in the habit of hitting babes unless they hit him first. Eventually she grabs him out of the air and holds him with her weight on top of him. He notices from her arms that she's a computer program from a game. He seems so slow to have only just now figured this out. He rolls away from her when I thought she was holding him, and there's padding until he uses the teleporter just as she starts using her legs as a helicopter, and he blacks out. Meanwhile, Iggy sits on a sturdy block of metal marked print, staring at components as she's trying and failing to force them together. One falls apart. This seems like a waste of time. She uses a whole lot of words to say what she already proved with actions. She warns Tails that there's a huge war machine behind him, and he says good with a grin. And she's confused, even though she's the one who told him to start putting stuff together. Tails said he had a great time building things, and they call this the Robotnik Antivirus and Geek Exterminator. The Ravage Tank. It's 20 times as tall as Tails, and it's got gun barrels and laser cannons and rocket launchers, while the top's a turret. It does a whole lot of describing without telling me what it looks like. Not even telling me the colors it is. Some bluebirds fly out of the end of one of its big barrels. Tails says he made almost all of it. He says they found a data bus and made a lot of modifications to it. I'm really impressed, and also a little confused because the writer thought he was stupid, only to know better. Even Tails' description in Stay Sonic itself is confused. Half of it is him being inquisitive and crafty, and the other half calls him stupid anyways. So it makes sense that in the UK books, he's half stupid and half genius. It makes sense that Tails would be made like this because of how useful technology could be to Sonic. With barely any characters to rely on, he inevitably makes 2 of them good with technology when he's ridden to a corner. She says nice work and blushes before saying she's part of his fan club and always wanted to meet him and get his autograph. He feels awkward and shuffles his feet, unable to think of something cool to say. Porker shouts at him that the writer has picked up something approaching at high speed. There's some padding as it does a bunch of telling instead of showing. They should have known better than to give it a reformat bomb, because take them out too, as she says. They climb a ladder into the tank and see people still fitting bits together. It's explained that it was put together by people who had never programmed before. And Porker says over here, so they stare at a glowing screen with a blip heading for the programming language section. It does a brief time skip to Sally reacting to Sonic saying that Eggman went into cyberspace. But it doesn't skip ahead enough, so he still recaps it all. It's realistic that he tried to attack the tank and still has a bruise on the top of his head, because it turns out he wasn't able to damage it. There's padding after that, starting with his recap. He eventually says he knows he destroyed one of Eggman's secret hideouts because the part of the computer he was in blew up too. He's taking credit for the explosion when it was really Eggman who did it. Iggy says it must have been a terminal on the network and not one of the important computers, or they'd have felt it. There's more padding. Sonic asks Iggy if she has any clue where the antivirus might be, and she says she doesn't, and then he asks where's a good place to start, which is really a rephrasing of the same question. And then this time she says the CPU, because nothing happens in the cyberspace without it knowing. So why didn't she say that right away? He gets enthusiastic and says enough talking, but still blathers anyways for a while, and there's padding again. Tails is annoyed because Sonic had taken command as if he'd been here the whole time. That's weird. There's more padding, such as Sonic talks way too much, saying a bunch of synonyms for advance. And eventually the tank starts advancing with Johnny at the acceleration controls. The tank has sensitive controls, so Tails keeps having to jerk the steering wheel from left to right and back to avoid driving the tank into mountains of stuff. And it takes a while describing the tank moving forwards. Every so often the tank bounces off an invisible wall on either side of the road. At least Tails is enjoying it. Porker says there's two big things flying this way fast. Two huge buzz bombers head for the tank, dropping bombs, and it shakes the top of the tank, throwing Tails to the floor. Sonic steers the tank, making that happen again, and eventually he uses the cannon's triggers against the robots to defeat them. I guess they were hit by a laser, and that's what caused their explosions. Porker says there's more incoming. I hate that nobody understands Sonic when he says man all the guns, and Johnny says they're not people because they're animals. It's too meta. It only implies that the writer didn't think enough. Of course they would use man and people to refer to themselves. Otherwise, how are those words in their vocabulary when there's only one human on the planet? The story has people get to their battle stations, and eventually the tank hurls a whole bunch of lethal stuff at the incoming robots. It doesn't matter to me what it uses because they all have the same effect. The story starts repeating itself and being padded out for a while. This sure was easy to write. At least it's new that Tails even made a tank with other people. Sonic says to try to have the tank outrun those badniks. It makes more sense than risking running out of ammo when there could be way more badniks than ammo. The last of the robots get destroyed, but then a flying fortress made of tubes with Tetris blocks starts following it that Tails had dealt with before. So there's padding, and they find out they can't keep going in the tank because the silver path ends at a huge hole, and Nikki just assumes it's because of the explosion in Wink Fortress, when she's in a crazy cyberspace universe that's got a maze for no reason, where she thinks a master computer on Mobius is so linked to it magically that its destruction would make them feel it, when they're clearly in another dimension. Tails doesn't know how to turn the tank around when the road isn't wide enough, so Sonic throws the tank into a wide turn, heading it straight for the side of the pathway in the hole. He slams on the brakes at the last second, and the front end of the tank stops. The back half carries on and drags the rest of the tank around with it so that the tank ends up facing the opposite way down the road. Sonic hits the throttle, and the tank accelerates back down the road it had come from. Eventually, Tails targets the robot and squeezes the triggers and is thrown backwards by recoil, smacking his head against the radar console, realistically. Sonic says nice shot, and eventually the robot starts falling towards the tank, and everyone has to rush out of it. So good thing they thought to have a lot of escape routes. Tails sees a rabbit at the bottom of the ladder saying he's fallen and can't get up. He literally says that, and it comes off like he's talking in monotone, so it's harder to take it seriously. Tails gets him over his shoulder and climbs the ladder to the deck of the tank. He jumps away from the falling robot while flying to slow their fall. The mother of the rabbit picks him up and thanks Tails and calls him brave. Tails shrugs and says it's all part of a hero's job. The tank and robot flicker and fade to a static color and then shrink to a tiny bright dot and vanish. Iggy says it was the programs crashing and getting deleted. Sonic interrupts Tails in his bragging because they've got plans to make right now, and he at least calls him buddy before saying that the first thing a hero learns is that there's a time to make plans instead of tell stories. He shouldn't have needed to explain this. Iggy gives a bunch of exposition in despair, and Tails says he's got an idea. He runs away, and Porco wonders why. Surprisingly, Sonic says it was probably the strain on his mind, and he doesn't have the grit and experience to be a real hero. And then he interrupts himself to say he's coming back. So that was supposed to be a joke, but I don't appreciate that joke at his expense, especially right after he told Sonic he did something heroic. It's a good thing Knuckles was introduced so Sonic could have a rivalry with someone other than Tails, but without him around, he has no one else to be like that with. And without Knuckles, the writer didn't know any better. Tails returns with a grin, holding a black, large box from the remains of the Tetris robot that'll take them to wherever they want to go. And he bets it's got a higher security rating than anything but Eggman. Iggy says nice one. She tries to slap his back, but isn't tall enough and can only reach the top of his legs. It's a constant struggle not to picture her as Iggy from STC Online, which is such a better design. Too bad she's not on the cover. The cover made me expect a different story with no creativity at all. It made me think Tails would be roboticized. I don't get why none of these books showed the main OCs of the book on the cover. They're important characters, so they should have made sure you'd picture them right. Tails presses buttons on the black box and learns how to get to their destination. The heroes and 100 other people get flown by an invisible force across a silver path suspended above the ground, while the sky is purple now. I guess the color changes with the time of the day. That's extra effort that wasn't needed from Eggman. The story wastes my time for a while. They head for a maze, and Sonic reassures everyone that they know about those and they're safe with them. They head for an opening in a low gray wall and are thrown into it and land on the black shadows beyond. Tails rubs his head sitting up and is sitting on Iggy, so he says he's sorry. It shouldn't describe her as rather squished, since she's fine right after this, like when Tails hit his head. They just keep getting invisible rings and healing. The opening in the wall is gone because the walls moved together. Eventually, Tails heads for a large door and is told to stop by Sally because they haven't figured out what to do. The sign on the door reads Space Intruders, and the black box wastes his time being useless. He has to be at a node exit before he could have go to do anything. It's too bad the fourth wall gets broken again. If it weren't for that, I'd say I kinda like that it's got the most humor out of all the books so far. Sonic says sorry about the box not working and has the idea to split into two teams to find the exit. He tells Sally to stay here with anyone who doesn't want to go with them, and that ends up being everyone other than him. Somehow even Tails wanted to stay. Sonic says it's just the four of us, making Porker be on his team and Tails be on Iggy's. It's nice of Porker to still go with him when he wanted to stay here. Sonic tells them to shout if they hit any trouble. He'd know they know that. This is just more wasting time. Tails' team runs away, and in seconds their footsteps can't be heard anymore, which is pretty magical. Sonic's team runs until they hear Porker scream and head for the noise. Tails says it's the witch and gets interrupted. It better be a new one. Sonic runs into the shadows without thinking and stops in front of a door that's got the remains of the black box smashed to pieces. Iggy catches up to him and says he's too fast while panting heavily. What happened to her being able to keep up with them? Somehow neither one of them lampshade this and say that cyberspace weakened her. He opens the door and the two of them get yanked through the doorway and it slams behind them. They have to deal with the game Frogger. It over-describes it when that's really it, but the writer didn't think he was allowed to use the actual name to just say that. So it's new that they have to dodge cars and trucks, but it doesn't need to take so long. And most of it's padded out by them talking to each other. He remembers the game has a time limit causing him to grab her arm and run into traffic, and eventually jump across river logs for a while. And there's a black void on either end of the river. How did she get stuck on a log? Sonic does a kick at the end of a log, and one end of it thumps against Iggy's log while she holds her arms out for balance and runs towards him and jumps to the riverbank, just barely avoiding being sent into a black void. Sonic pushes a metal door open, and what's behind them gets replaced with a labyrinth from before. But now they're in a different part of it. Somehow, Sonic needs that pointed out to him. Somehow, Sonic says cool and wants to see what other games are offered because it could do with a good shoot-up game, when Iggy almost died, and I wondered if she would back there. Somehow he thinks she'd want to try Golden Hatchet and they disagree on which door to pick. Sonic gets told about Thunderbird 4, and says he didn't want to shoot me up. When what did he expect from a shoot 'em up in this context? How did he know to say this based on the name? Iggy refuses to go to the place Chun leaves from, and he agrees with her, which impressed me. There's a lot of padding as the story repeats itself. They see a door called Planet Mobius and go into a look-alike of Green Hill Zone, but it doesn't smell like anything at all, and somehow everything seems two-dimensional to them. It says there's catchy background music, and Iggy says the resolution's what's missing and points out that the flowers aren't real. I hate that Sonic breaks the fourth wall again. Iggy figures out that the reason this game was made for Eggman was to test his plans. That still wouldn't be useful to him if he was still there, because then he still would have gotten punched in the chin. They see a buzz bomber, and Sonic jumps towards it and hears his own battle cry, and it gets squashed between two blue balls of energy. If the writer knew that animals pop out of badniks, why does it almost never happen in the story when there's almost nothing good about not writing that? Sonic notices that his replica's spikes aren't as smooth as they're supposed to be, but otherwise admires his looks. The replica wonders what he's doing here and says this is a one-player game, and despite knowing he's in a game, he still acts apprehensive and assumes that Sonic's an evil robot duplicate from Eggman, and threatens him if he is. Why did Eggman program him to be able to think that a robot made by Eggman is evil? He should have known Sonic might meet the replica and try to get his help. Sonic explains things to him, and somehow the replica doesn't believe he's a computer program and says he's the original, even though he just said this is a one-player game. I like that Sonic gets written to tell him to compare his hands to his, but he would think that's how the original's supposed to look like. The replica still doesn't believe him, even though he wouldn't have enough memories based on Eggman's lack of personal knowledge about him. So Sonic should point out that. But he does say something weird's going on and wonder why he's here. He gets told the answer, and it's sad to see him say that a fox with two tails is silly. Why would Eggman program a replica of Sonic to say that? I guess he programmed him before Sonic 2, and that's why there's only Sonic 1 zones here. Sonic retorts that a two-tailed fox is almost as silly as a blue hedgehog, which only makes sense because in this book, he wasn't always blue. And I was briefly confused and had to remind myself of that because of how accurate this book feels to the games for the most part. He asks if he wants to help them look for their friends, and the replica agrees. He gets given more exposition as they go through the level, and thankfully, the writer had the mercy to not tell me exactly what was said to spare me the padding. Sonic even tells him how he got the holes in his spikes, which is good because he had asked that. The replica gets worried that destroying Eggman's main base would destroy the computer with him in it, and Eggy says that she catches up that they'll download him to a different computer first. Eventually the Wrecking Ball Eggmobile gets squashed between two Sonics, and that instantly ends the fight, causing it to go back the way it came while sending smoke out of it. Why would Eggman have programmed that thing to be so lame? What was the point of him even programming that at all? He already discovered that he couldn't beat Sonic with that thing. All this isn't new. It's just telling me that the Sonic X comic wasn't as original as I thought when it had a virtual reality simulation of Sonic 1. And the book shouldn't have said squashed if it was still functional enough to leave afterwards, because that means its shape wasn't squashed. They run on a few steps to where Prison Egg, as it's called, is on the grass. The name Prison Egg goes with the egg theming of Eggman. Well, it's still describing what it is, but not as much as Animal Capsule, which says it as animals. So not a good name. Again, the word squashed is abused. Tails and Porker aren't really squashed in it. They're fine. Sonic calls Tails his buddy, and there's more padding. There's a big metal door, and Sonic tells the replica to keep up the good work, which isn't good enough for him, and why would it be? What good work? Everything he's doing here is pointless, which he caught on to. He wants to help them out because being stuck inside a microchip isn't a job for a hero. They all look at each other, and Porker's looking at something he pulled out of his nose. So that was unnecessary. Iggy says the best way the replica can help is by staying here, not in the long term. Somehow the replica is satisfied with this condescending line. The heroes go back into the maze with a way out of it in front of them. Porker says what about the others, and Sonic says that if they get out of the computer they'll be able to rescue them easily. Sonic jokes that if they're attacked, Sally could boss the program to death no problem. That's a fun line. I wonder if the writer knew about SAT-AM. They run down the silver path and there's padding. They see an ancient looking building and the sky's orange above them. I don't know why Tails said either Eggman's been putting on more weight or they've arrived. They've reached their destination in planet Mobius, which is running a test invasion. And there's more padding. Tails uses slang, so Porker's happy that Tails read that dictionary lent him. That's wholesome. I didn't expect that. I thought Tails was done with that. Iggy's right, they are wasting time. It continues to do so. They have to wait in a line of weird-looking people who look like inanimate objects. Unlike the writer, I realize it doesn't matter what they look like, so I'm not going to describe them. Somehow Sonic thinks he can just ask how to get to the front of the line. I thought they were going to fight their way through. Why are they waiting in line at the DMB? I know why in universe, but why would you write this? Iggy says the floating flashing lights can only hold 1 bit of info at a time, and 8 bits make a byte. So Sonic says Eggman's cheap for using a computer with an 8-bit processor. Him saying Robotnik makes him get sent to the front of the line. The monitor grows arms and legs and flashes as it walks into the shadows, and one of its hands produces a whistle as it blows. It says priority instructions coming through, and I assume the reason it didn't tell them how they could get to the front of the line earlier was that it knew the other programs would lie to take advantage of it. The monitor wants a reward from Eggman for this, and somehow wants to be a joystick when it grows up. The story goes back to wasting my time, mostly with dialogue. Sonic leaves it up to Iggy to state their business to the flashing light behind the desk, because she's good at computer jargon, which is smart of him. She says they need info on a file location on virus eradication. Porker compliments the bit, and sirens go off because it got interrupted while it was being programmed. Sonic's told to take even more waiting for the CPU to be reset. So he jumps over the desk and dives into the opening in the wall, which he could have done earlier. And Tails follows. I hate that Iggy talks as if they weren't already in cyberspace. They fall through a bunch of dots and yellow lines representing data and flashes circle around them. And it goes on for a while about this redundantly. It takes several paragraphs to get the plot progression. Sonic grabs Tails' hand and yanks him down the left fork in a road to head towards, because all of a sudden they're not falling anymore, and there's no fall damage. What a magical place. He heads for a star shape that goes between orange and green and flickers with letters and numbers. And a gold thread goes around them 3 times and zips them back into the whirling grid. It wasn't necessary for Sonic to break the 4th wall. Maybe that's why this was his last Sonic book. He was tired of Sonic. There's more padding where at one point Tails takes Sonic literally on program lock. It should be Sonic who's saying the speed's great, and Tails wishing they knew how to slow down here. Something flashing heads towards them, corkscrewing along the same gold thread. It's obsessed with describing scenery, but I don't know what that something looks like. Sonic grabs Tails and jumps and starts falling again. It's too bad he was written to grab the scruff of his tiny neck, when grabbing a bigger target would be easier. A mist goes over to them and forms into a mouth to ask with a female voice who they are. She calls herself Psyche, and takes a needlessly long time to explain that she's the ghost of all the deleted programs gathering scraps and bits and trying to disrupt the CPU's work, because she somehow has free will. But it's only when it's crashed that she can manifest and communicate. So she's a magical being native to the Pocket Universe Eggman made into his computer. And she only got generated because in this universe, everyone who dies becomes a ghost. Got it. I'm confused, but at least this is interesting. Tails tells her the truth about what he wants while Sonic's worried. Psyche thinks Eggman's a fat fool, but somehow doesn't think he's a good programmer. She says this was a nice organized computer system until Eggman turned up and deleted her. If he truly deleted her, as in not just put her in the recycle bin, then she wouldn't still be functional. Why would he just settle for putting her in the recycling bin? Eventually she feels she can help them get to Eggman's personal file space because the log is there, and that she's got some voodoo and digital alchemy that sends mist at them, causing them to fly towards a gold wire for them to grab. which has them hurtling along it until they whip around the side of a tower that's brown and silver supporting a big ball that's black and red. 2 more towers stick out from its side, and the top is a pink ball with a mustache face, with gold wires looped around it. And the thread the heroes are on curves around like a roller coaster a bunch around an Eggman-shaped structure, until they finally jump to the nose of it, so 3D Blast wasn't original there. They end up in the dark on something soft, and Tails wishes he had some light. So a flashing light hovers between them. Sonic and Tails wouldn't have been able to get this far if Eggman had programmed everyone in cyberspace to recognize them and treat them like enemies. I have to assume it makes sense that he didn't because that would take forever. Couldn't it just program a virus into this place that would make that happen? Sonic remembers that Iggy told him to give a bit only one piece of info at a time. So he explains in that sort of way that they need information on the location of the antivirus. It pads things out because the light reveals that it's a program log. So Sonic says they need to find another location. There's more padding where Tails asks Sonic to pick where they're gonna shout out before they get hurled outside and put on a gold cord roller coaster. It had Eggman care about making roller coasters before Sonic Unleashed. There's more padding until the ride stops, and Sonic finds himself sliding on ice and getting sent off the structure. He grabs Tails mid-flight, the story finally remembering that Tails can fly. They assume the ice is a defense, and Sonic's clever enough to wonder if trying to smash it actually isn't the way, which is pretty cool. And has the idea to remove his shoes and run on the ice as Tails hangs on to him. So the ice melts from the friction. Somehow this takes 2 paragraphs to describe before they fall into the hole into an office. Sonic puts his damp shoes on, and Tails finds a box labeled the Antivirus Toolkit. There's padding before he has to tell Tails to look in the box to find the medicine, which is a liquid with numbers and letters. Sonic lampshades that they've wasted enough time. So why were they written to talk so much anyways? Tails doubts they'd be able to get out of here, and Sonic says he knows a ghost who can help them, and calls for Psyche. And somehow, Tails doesn't have faith in him until Psyche appears to them. It's never explained how you pronounce it. She warns him that there's not much time left before she can't help him, and Sonic says to get them out of the CPU, and waste time saying please. Not that stopped her from sending them flying through the opening in the wall over to Porker and Iggy, who think they were only gone for 6 seconds. So the Chronotron speed is different there. They head for the exit to the building in the orange sky outside. Tails thinks of an idea and walks up to a multi-sided crystal robot at the end of the line and chats with them. He ends up punching him and shattering him into pieces to take his black box. So why did he bother talking to him? Why didn't anyone in front of them in the line hear the shattering and turn around and freak out? The rest of the people in the office would freak out at this. Tails just says they need this to activate the output device, and it cuts to them in front of the huge eyeball of the output device. So I'm just left to assume they were noticed, but nobody wants to leave the building to run after them. After padding where they get scared of where they'll come out, Sonic presses activate, and they get sucked into the eye-shaped device. There's padding where they're in darkness before they're sent out of the slot of a tall white machine onto a metal floor. And they're surrounded by tall buildings with a sky that's got strange shades of color. Eventually, Sonic reveals that they're not still in cyberspace. They're in Scrap Brain Zone. Sonic uses the antivirus needle to cure his friends. And Tails says now he gets his revenge by injecting him. Sonic tells Iggy to try to find Sally and the others in the cyberspace through a computer to get them out. And somehow he trusts the defenseless Porker to guard her instead of Tails while he leaves with Tails. But the leaving's for nothing because minutes later he returns from the scouting. Sonic says Scrap Brain Zone's deserted, and it describes in a long-winded way everyone getting sent out of the computer and cured by Sonic. This whole book is full of new things. I don't think Sonic's ever injected anyone with a needle before. And they run home unafraid of where they are. It's nice of Sally to go off to look after some of the littlest creatures. Porker's girlfriend Jilly is mentioned, and he goes off with her. Porker has a girlfriend? Why didn't SCC do this?